And there was an original Lockyer that we had. You might have seen it in the news fairly recently. That originally we thought it was Beethoven's, but it turns out not to be Beethoven's. It was believed that. Have any of you read that book, Beethoven's Hair?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's the Lockyer.
Oh, that's the Lockyer.
Yeah, that Beethoven's case. There's again, along with the hair tradition, there was also a tradition of making life masks and also death masks. So there's Beethoven also has a life mask and a death mask. The difference there being obvious, right? But how you made the mask was the same, in that you would put plaster over your face, and it was a very uncomfortable thing. So basically that's what we have here. We have an assortment of various keyboard instruments over the evolution of the keyboard during Beethoven's time. So we have a clavichord against the wall there. The black and red instrument is a harpsichord. And the rest of these are forte pianos at varying stages of its development. So the clavichord and the harpsichord, they're more associated with the Baroque period, but there's a lot of crossover. So even when the piano became more, like the keyboard instrument of choice, let's say, lots of people still had a clavichord at home, and lots of people still were using their harpsichord too. So it's not like they just got rid of them or anything. And that's why a lot of earlier editions of Beethoven sonatas, for example, they'll say for clavier, which isn't necessarily mean piano, it just means keyboard. The reason is that publishers, they didn't want to discriminate. They wanted to sell their copies of music. So if you just said, this is for the piano, then everyone who had a clavichord would be like, I guess it isn't for me, so I won't buy it. Same with the harpsichord. So lots of people are still using these instruments, including Beethoven, at least earlier in his life. So have any of you played a clavichord before?
No.
Okay. So I will play it for you.
Should we move over there?
Well, stay put for now. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Piano as opposed to a harpsichord. So what's the difference between a harpsichord and a piano?
Plucking versus hammering. Versus hammering.
So when I play on the clavichord, It's actually hitting the string. So in that sense, it's a little more like a piano as opposed to a harpsichord. Now, it's probably where the similarities between a clavichord and a piano begin and end. Unlike a piano, it does not have an escapement or an escape action, and it also doesn't have hammers. It has these brass tangents that are hitting two thin wire strings, and thus you're getting a thin metallic sound as a result.
It doesn't have the quill either.
Well, no, the quill would be for the harpsichord because that's the plucking. But here you have tangents that are hitting the string. And because it doesn't have that escape action, you can do an expressive effect that no other keyboard instrument can do. Where you give it a form of vibrato.
Yeah.
So any of you who play a stringed instrument know what that's all about.
Could you do that one more time, if you don't mind?
Wow.
Yeah. So Baroque music, art, architecture is all about embellishment, ornamentation, and so you can do any number of things with that note. It doesn't matter. But for the person playing the clavichord, then you can give it that effect. So they don't actually call it vibrato for this instrument. They call it Bebung, which is a German term for quake. So basically you're quaking your hand up and down. So for those of you who play a stringed instrument, you know, it's a sideways motion. But here it's a much more up and down motion where you're oscillating the pitch somewhat. And yeah, so that's kind of the interesting thing about the clavichord, interesting expressive effect. I'm more of a string player myself, but I hear pianists complain all the time how they can't do vibrato.
Yeah.
And then I say, well, I can't play all the notes you can, so you know, life's full of these trade-offs, aren't they? But on this instrument, you actually can. It's portable in the 17th century style of things. This is before Steve Jobs came along. But you can pack it up. There'd probably be a handle on it. You could take the legs off, take it to your friend's house, and have a clavichord party. Doesn't that sound like fun?
Sounds so fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Especially with a volume.
Doesn't it, though? Well, you know, I mean, you could probably, you know, if you're gathered around like we are here, and it's a smaller gathering, you could do some musical stuff on it. People could appreciate it. But it's, of course, very situational. And also, this is a modern replica. So this one, I think, was made in the 1950s.
Okay.
So if this were a period clavichord, it would be probably even smaller than this. And just like harpsichords, there are different schools of making clavichords. So they came in all shapes and sizes. So the instrument could be quite different depending on where you lived, where you were, what country you were in, all of that.
So is this a typical number of keys?
No, there was no typical number yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if it, even though this looks small, it probably would have been even smaller.
Okay.
But that would vary probably by quite a bit, depending on who made it and where it was made. And then architecturally, it's a little bit strange in that you have this, well, geometrically, I should say, it's a little strange that you have this kind of Tetris shape here, and this is where you'd put your tuning tools. The harpsichord, you can kind of look at this as being sort of almost a classist thing. Probably most people had a clavichord at home, whereas your wealthier people, aristocrats, people who had space for it, would have had a harpsichord. And the harpsichord borrows terminology from the organ. So the organ would have been kind of the ultimate musical experience at that time. But just like now, not very many people have access to an organ. You would have to have been a Kapellmeister or somebody of some musical stature. And also they didn't have electricity at that time. So it was a multi-person procedure to even be able to play the organ. But here we have two manuals, so it would be a double manual harpsichord with stops. Here there are these lever stops. I suppose it would have been made out of wood at the time. But someone was talking about a quill, so that's what this is here. So it's that little small piece, and that's called the plectrum. So that's the piece that's actually plucking the string, and then this triangular block of felt acts as a damper. So when it slides back under the string, it'll minimize the sound. 4-foot stop, at least that's what I think organists would excuse me, call it. Do a much higher timbre to it. And then now that buff stop's on the bottom manual. And you have maybe a more traditional harpsichord sound on the top manual. And another thing you can do is that it has a slide coupler. Again, organs also have couplers with a similar functionality. This one you push in the top manual, and now you can play both simultaneously. So just a word about dynamics, because harpsichords are known not to be able to do that, right? It's kind of one of the, all the options and all the different colors you can get from the instrument is very nice, but because it's plucked, and it's always being plucked at the same velocity, you can't have that forte, piano, crescendo, decrescendo, kind of the stuff that we take for granted now. But if you look at the Italian concerto, I don't play it, but it has dynamics in it. So like down here would be considered forte, and then up in the top manual would be considered piano. So we consider that a terraced dynamic system, which is what they used at that time. So it's not the direct forte-piano relationship that we kind of have now. To the land of pianos, which is good, right? And, a little more comfortable world for most of us, probably. But this piano probably is a lot different than one that you are accustomed to. So, I don't know, is there any differences, key differences you see between this piano and a piano you usually play on at home, at school? Smaller, otherwise it's all wood. It's smaller, so this one has 66 keys. Now, just to be specific, this particular instrument was made in 1985 by Janine Johnson. She lives up in Berkeley. She kind of specializes in these sort of early instruments. The original is in the Smithsonian and is made in 1795. So stylistically, you kind of maybe have an idea as to when this kind of piano was used. And as you notice, there are no pedals. So, also, just a couple differences that you can't possibly see from your vantage point. So it's straight strung, and there are 2 strings to a note instead of 3. And also the gauge of the strings is smaller, and the hammers are also smaller and made out of leather instead of like a compressed felt. So all of that basically adds up to having less resonance, not as much power, but also it gives you a very nice definition to like a single melodic line. Okay, so very well suited for the period in which it was used, you know, classical period, Mozart, Haydn, early Beethoven. Beethoven would have been around 25 years old when this style instrument was used. Some of you might have noticed that I was using my knee. So as was mentioned, no pedals. In lieu of pedals, there are knee levers. So you use your knees on this instrument. But it might give you some ideas, you know, it can get, you know, as I said, food for thought, you know, and different teachers, I don't know how you teach it, but some teachers will say, oh, you half pedal it, or you, so there are different strategies thereof, but yeah, it's nice to just kind of have the real thing, if you will, and to employ the actual strategy that Beethoven asked for. Then you can kind of see, it's like, oh, okay, this is what he meant.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, our pianos, you know, they're wonderful. I mean, I'm sure Beethoven would have liked them too, but I'm sure Beethoven would have said, yeah, just play that thing without, you know, wouldn't have worked. Okay, so now we get into our two original instruments. So this one is made in 1823. It's an English piano made by Broadwood and Sons. Beethoven also owned a Broadwood piano. He's probably one of the few Viennese who owned a Broadwood instrument. Pretty much you would be playing and using whatever was in your area. So why did Beethoven have an English instrument? Well, he had publishing contacts in England, friends there, and they basically they banded together and bought Beethoven this piano and sent it to him. Hold on. Kind of an interesting thing, Beethoven never bought a piano his entire life. They were always kind of given to him as gifts or whatever. So one of the few perks Beethoven had, actually. And that's why Beethoven owned a Broadwood. He got it kind of in the middle when he was writing the Hammerklavier Sonata. So it kind of gives you an idea as to when he got the instrument. What was your question? Broadwood piano. Well, how could he have liked it? By the time he got it, he was functionally deaf. But Beethoven was a sophisticated enough musician where I think he knew the instrument well enough, and just the tactile, he could tell, how the instrument was responding and the qualities of the instrument. So I'm sure he understood. Cast iron in it. And Beethoven's Broadwood was all wood. So his was made in 1817, this one was made in 1823. So this must have been the next model or two up from the one Beethoven owned. And that was one big structural innovation at that time. The piano you were playing, it's really nice. I really like the sound to it. Unfortunately, it goes out of tune so easily. I mean, you just look at it wrong and it goes out of tune. If it's in tune, it's by far, I think, the best sounding instrument we have here. But it just has to, that's the key. That's the key to it. Even though this is our oldest instrument, it keeps its pitch the best. And I think a lot of it has to do with those materials. This one has a split damper pedal. So if you wanted to just hold on to your treble notes, or if you wanted to hold on to your bass notes, then you could utilize the other side. This must have been a feature Mr. Broadwood was experimenting around with. Beethoven's piano also had a split damper pedal. To be honest with you, I don't find it very useful. I think that you can pretty much achieve any effect you want just by using the whole pedal. But it's an interesting talking. They call them mop head dampers. I think that's what they call them. That's what the technician called them, so that's why I'm calling them that. But so essentially, they're a less effective damper. They do work eventually. But yeah, it's not the immediate response that you would normally expect from the dampers, like when you get from the Viennese school of pianos. So we get most of our influence on the modern piano from the English in terms of the mechanics, the basic setup, the power of it. But for the dampers, it's more the Viennese school that we get our influence from. But these are English-style dampers, and so even after you employ it, there's still a little bit of sound residue afterwards. So it's not immediate. So that's why staccato might not. You might have to kind of recalibrate how you play it on an English-style piano. Yeah, some guys. Our director at the time, someone fitted it with Viennese style, and then he took it and then refitted it with the English style. And some people say, well, you ruined this piano because I don't care. But yeah, so that's the English school of dampers, and that's the way the English liked it. So it's just it wasn't that it was less effective. It's just that's the way they wanted their pianos to react. Una corda pedal. So now when I use the una corda, it's truly an una corda.